What's up YouTube? My name is Brett Westwood and today I'm going to teach you guys how to use the OpenAI API so you can create your own custom ChatGPT bot. And we're also going to go over one of the examples that OpenAI gives us, which is the text translator. So we're going to be able to translate English into Spanish, into French, into whatever language you want. And this is like a real world application that you guys can use to implement in your projects. So like the title says, this is a beginner-friendly course, so I'm not going to go too in-depth into the docs of the OpenAI, but I do highly recommend that you go through all of the docs that you want, and there is a lot of cool stuff that you guys can do, so I recommend highly checking that out. And also, before we start, if you could hit that like button and also subscribe for more content like this will be greatly appreciated. And before we start as well, I also want to say that I'm using NextJS 13's framework inside of React. So we are going to use Node.js inside of the docs, and they do allow you to use a lot of programming languages to access the API. So you do not have to use the Node.js. You could use Python, you can use whatever programming language you're comfortable with. So with all that out of the way, let's get started and let's jump right into the tutorial. The very first thing we are going to do is we're going to set up our environment. So we are going to use, like we said, NextJS 13, and I am going to open up my terminal on my computer, and I'm going to change directories into where I keep all of my projects. And the command line we are going to use for NextJS 13 is going to be npx create-next-app at latest. Then you press enter, and then it's going to prompt you to a few questions. So what is your project name? We're going to say ChatGPT tutorial. We're not going to use TypeScript, so we're going to say no. No to ESLint. Yes to TailwindCSS. No to the source directory. Yes to the app router. And no to the import alias. So now it's going to initialize the project, and it's also going to install all the dependencies necessary for NextJS 13. This should take about 10 seconds, and then we're ready to go. After it's ready, it says successed. Now we have to cd into the ChatGPT tutorial or whatever you named your project. And then I'm going to do a shortcut to my text editor, which is VSCode. And I'm just going to say code dot and then enter. Now it's going to open up my VSCode right here. We are going to close the terminal and we are going to make this full screen. And before you even get started, if you do have any questions, I know this is a beginner's course. Don't hesitate to ask inside of the comments section. I'll try to explain everything I can to the fullest and simplest version I can. So like I said, if anything, you can message me or message me through my social medias. I'm going to have the GitHub repo up too in the description below. And I will have all the links you need down below in the description as well. Another prerequisite you need before starting this is you need Node on your system. So let me go over this framework boilerplate real quick. So we have a Tailwind config file allowing us to use TailwindCSS. We have our package JSON. We also have a public folder to store all images necessary. We have the Node modules, and then we have this app folder. So the app folder is what we're going to be working in. We have a page.js, which is your home page. We have a root layout, which is layout.js, and that is going to style and keep anything you want on all of the children of your application. So let's just go on this real quick. So we can actually initialize fonts here from Google and style them on all the children of the project. This is where HTML and body tag is, and this is the root layout that is wrapping all of the children. So we have our global CSS file. We will remove lines 5 through 27 and keep lines 1 through 3. And then other than that, let's go inside of the home page, which is the page.js. Remove everything in the return. We will add a div, and we will just say home page. And then remove the import here at the top. And now we are ready to start using the OpenAI API and actually start creating your chatbot. So to create your chatbot or whatever you want to use with OpenAI's API, you have to go to openai.com and you either have to sign up with an account or you can log in with some of the providers they provide. I'm logged in using my Google account. Next, you are going to go to the developers tab right here, and we are going to click API reference. So you could either click documentation, read through a bunch of the docs, get more familiar with what they're offering, but we're just going to start right here in the API reference. So the very first thing we have to do to interact with the API through some HTTP request is we have to install this package. We are using the Node.js library, so we're going to install this. If you're using Python, you install this. So let's go back in our project, open up our terminal, paste it here, press enter, and then OpenAI package will be installed. Check the package JSON, and we are using version 3.2.1. Perfect. So now let's go back to the API reference. And the next thing you need to do is you need to have your API keys so we could authenticate your account. So we need to connect an account to your actual API request, because requesting stuff from this API actually costs money. They actually do give you a free trial. I don't know how many different requests you can send out in the free trial, but even if it's paid, it is not even pennies. So it is affordable, I feel like, to actually call requests from the OpenAPI. So this is what we're going to have to do to connect this so they know which account to charge. And also, this API key needs to be secret. So nobody should know the key, because if somebody does know your key, they can use your account and start running up money on your account. So this cannot be shared client side, and that's why your application needs to be a full stack application. And to receive your API key, or to retrieve it, you are going to have to go here at the top right, click your profile, click view API keys, and then you could click create new secret key. When you create the new secret key, make sure you copy and paste it somewhere that is safe on your computer, because after you exit out, you will not be able to view this key again. So you can only view the key one time, and then if you refresh this page or go out of this page, you won't be able to see it again, and it'll look like this. So make sure you have that key ready to use, because we are going to use this key later. After we have it, let's go back to the API reference key. And now let's actually configure OpenAI onto our application. And we are going to use this example with the Node.js package right here inside the API reference. So to do that, we are going to create a utils folder inside of our app. And then inside of there, a new file called OpenAI.js. The reason why we are creating a file inside of a utils folder is because we only want to configure OpenAI one time. Because if you don't do this, you have to configure it every time you have it on a back server request. So this is the right way to do it. So we are going to go back. We will copy this code, paste it here, and I'll tell you what we're going to change and what we're going to keep. So those two imports, we need the configuration and OpenAI API from OpenAI. We are going to set the configuration to a new configuration, and it's going to initialize an object. We do not need the organization. The reason why people have an organization here is because that means there's multiple accounts or people on a specific user account on OpenAI. And that's how they're going to be able to identify which account to charge money to and which one not to. So we don't need that. We're just going to remove that. But we do need the API key. And like I said, we are going to store it in an env file. So let's just create an env file on the root layout of our application .env. Let's copy this value term here, paste it inside of the env file, and then you're just going to paste your secret key right here. I will do that off screen, but I'm going to paste my secret key here, and then you're ready and connected to OpenAI. After that, we are initializing the OpenAI variable to the OpenAI API, passing through this configuration. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to remove this response down here because we don't need the list engines. And then we need to export this as OpenAI. So now we have access to this configuration on any file we want, as long as we import it from this file. Now let's create the client side page, which all we're going to have is a title and an input and a button to submit it. And we want to do this because we actually want users to be able to type in whatever they want. And then the AI will actually answer that input value and then spit out a message back to that user. There is other ways you can use the API AI. but this is going to be the most useful way to use it in a real world application. So let's start with that. We are going to just go on the home page, which is the page.js. Let's remove this homepage text. And what we're going to do here is we're going to style everything with TailwindCSS. So if you want to skip this step, you can. Everything's going to be timestamped, and you could just go and skip forward to actually implementing the API. But for this, we are going to have another div. And then inside, let's start styling. So class name, we'll have all the text center, and then a padding top of 48. Okay, right below that, we're going to have an H1. Inside of this H1, let's style this. We're going to have the text. We could do 7XL. We're going to have the font bold. Tracking is going to be tight. And then we're going to have an ask me. And then we'll have a span because I do want to make it kind of cool looking. We're going to have a gradient orange. So it's going to say ask me anything. And the anything is going to be in the gradient orange. So to do that, we have to have this kind of style on the span. So for the class name, we're going to have a background gradient to right, and then it's going to be this specific orange here that I'm just going to copy and paste. So that's going to be the orange gradient color right there. But that's just styling the background. So we need to make sure the text is going to be transparent so we can see through it. So now everything's going to be colored in that orange. And then we want the background clipped to the text. That means the background's only going to be visible on the text. So that's how that's going to look. And I'll show you guys how this looks in 1 second. So now we have the H1. Right underneath the H1, let's have a form. Inside of this form, we are going to have an input. And I am just going to use this Copilot that's telling me what to put in here. So we're going to have a border of 2, border grade 300, round and MD, padding of 2, margin top 4. Width is going to be 50%. We're going to have margin left and right of auto, and the placeholder is going to be ask me anything. So for now, that will be fine. And then right below the input, we will have a button. And this button, we're just going to click send. The type is going to be submit because we'll have it on submit at the top of the form. And then let's style the button a little bit. We'll have margin left of 8. Text is going to be XL. We're going to have a font of bold. Padding left and right of 5. Padding top and bottom of 3. We're going to have a background of that orange FF7A1F. With the text will be white. We're going to have the edges rounded 3XL. And then on hover, we're going to have a BG of that same color. So FF7A1F. And then we're going to have an opacity of 60. So it's going to be a little lighter when we actually hover over it. Okay. So other than that, we should be looking good to go. Let's just put an on submit on the form. So we'll have an on submit. And then we are going to call a function when we actually click that button. So we're going to call a function called get messages. So we haven't created this function yet, which we are going to create now. And let me just have a class name of a padding top of 10 right here. Okay. So we're going to have to put the inputs values inside of state. So that means we are going to have to use the useState hook from React. And if we use any hooks from React inside of a file inside of NextJS 13, that means we have to mark this file as a use client. The reason being is because all of the files inside NextJS 13 are server-side rendered by default. So now we have to make it client-side rendered. So we made a client-side rendered by saying use client. Now we must import the useState here at the top from React. After we do that, I want to create and initialize 2 states here at the top. So the first one I'm going to say is value and then set value. And this is going to have an initial value of an empty string. And the value and set value is going to be whatever the user types. That's going to be the value we send to the backend, and that's going to be like the question or whatever the user wants to ask the AI. The next thing we want is we want the message. So we want messages and set messages. This is going to be the response the AI gives us. And we are going to have this as null, as an initial value. So now let's actually implement the states on the input. So for the input, we're going to add a value, and the value is going to equal the value. So whatever the value is. And we're going to get the value by adding an onChange event handler right here. So we're going to have an anonymous function passing in the event, and we're going to have a set value function that is going to take in the e.target.value. That means we are going to take in whatever they type and then set it to the actual value. And then when we get the value, we are going to pass it to our backend server, and then we're going to send that value to the API of OpenAI to get the request and then send it back to our front end. So there is our state there, and now let's actually create this get messages function right below where we initialize the state. So we're going to say const get messages, and this will be an async function. We're going to have it event prevent default. That means we're going to prevent the default of whatever happens every time we do a render on a page. And then we are going to use the fetch request. That is what is recommended inside of NextJS 13. So I'm going to use the fetch request to fetch the data back to our backend and start fetching information from our backend to our front end. So to do that, we are going to first define the options. To define the options, it's going to be an object. Inside of the object, we have to define the method. The method is going to be a post request. After that, we have to define what we're sending back there. And to define that, we have to stringify into a JSON what the value is going to be. And the value is just going to be whatever we mark the value is inside of this useState. So we're going to stringify the message, which is going to be the value. After that, we have to define the headers. The headers is just going to be an application JSON with the content type. We will close this as well. And then we have our options there. So after we do that, now we have to close this one more time. And then right below that, we are going to actually call our fetch request. We're going to set that value to a response variable. And then we're going to await the fetch. And we have to await it from a certain API endpoint, which we have not created. So let's create that real quick. So to create endpoints for our server side on NextJS 13, we create it by using folders. And those are going to be the route paths. So the first folder is going to be the API. The second folder is going to be, we can name it whatever we want. We could just say OpenAI. And then inside of that folder, we're going to have a route.jsx file. So this is going to be our backend post request server right here for HTTP request to OpenAI. So now we could define it here /API/OpenAI. And then it's going to pass through all of the options we just defined. And then when we get the data back, we're just going to put in a variable called data, and then we're going to await the response.json. And then we could just console.log, and it'll be data, and then we're going to get the data, right? And then make sure after we get the data, we have to set it into state so we can show it on our screen. So we're going to set messages to data. So whatever data we get back, it's now going to be in the variable messages because we are setting messages to the data, which will create these messages value here. So now we just got to create the backend for this specific route. To create the backend, we are just going to go inside of the route.jsx file we made inside of the /API/OpenAI folder. First thing we need to do is we need to import OpenAI from that utils folder we created earlier in this tutorial. Now we could actually use the OpenAI inside of our post request. And we don't have to configure it again because we already did inside of the utils folder. Next thing we have to do is we have to import next response from next/server. This is going to allow us to send data back to our front end, and we have to have this imported only on Next.js 13. So make sure this is imported as well. And now let's create our asynchronous function. And the name for the asynchronous function is going to be whatever request you're sending. So it's going to be a post. So we're going to have request passed in as parameters, whatever request we get from the front end. And now we need to set a value to that request. So I'm just going to call it body. So we're going to get the body, and we're going to set it to request.json. And now all we have to do is we could console log before we keep going forward to make sure we're actually getting the body request. So let me run my server real quick. npm run dev. It will open up localhost 3000. We could go here and then we can see what we created to in the front end and make sure everything's working. So this is what we created when we styled everything, and it's just a very simple input with a title and a button. So we will make this half the screen real quick. And the console log, since this is server side, is going to be inside of your terminal. So it should be right here. So let's move this up a little bit. And let's type in something. So what is 2 plus 2? And then the body should be whatever this is, a message. We're going to get an error because we haven't finished everything, which is fine. But as you can see here, we get a console log that says message, what is 2 plus 2? So that means we're actually sending information from the front end to the back end and we're receiving it. So everything looks good so far. So let's keep going on with the code. And now if you actually look at the API reference, you will see we are going to use the create chat completion. So if you want to see where this is, I could go to the docs real quick. Let's open this. In the API reference, we can use the create chat completion, and we will use this stuff right here. So I'm going to show you exactly how that works. And here's an example response that we're going to get back. And this is going to be in handy because this is how we're going to be able to access the AI's response. So let's minimize this real quick. Let's create a variable called completion. And we are going to await the OpenAI create chat completion. This is going to be an object. And the first thing we have to define is the model. So OpenAI gives you a lot of different models you could choose from. Probably the most advanced and best model to use for most people is going to be GPT-3.5-Turbo. Let me just make sure that's spelled right. And it is. So as you can see here, model GPT 3.5-Turbo. And if you do have access to GPT-4, I recommend using that. So now let's minimize this. And let's define the content we're sending to the people. So the thing we are going to send is we're going to send messages. And let's define where these messages are coming from. So we're going to have an object. And the role is going to be from the user. And then the content is going to be the body.message. And the reason why it's body.message is because we're taking the variable body and then we have to go inside of the message. So you see here in the console, it says message. We don't want this to show up when we actually send our information back to our API. So this is all we're sending. What is 2 plus 2? We don't need message. What is 2 plus 2? So that's why it's body.message. So after we do that, we can put a comma behind the end of the array. And then we can add max tokens of 150. That's pretty much just going to set a limit on the number of tokens that the AI is going to send back. And you are charged per tokens pretty much in a sense. So this is going to make sure nobody's just running up your bill. So you could have this here or you don't have to have it here. And then we'll also have a temperature. And the temperature we'll put as 0.9. And I'm going to show you exactly what the temperature means. So as you can see here, the temperature says what sampling temperature to use. You can choose between 0 and 2. Higher values will make the output more random, while the lower values will make it more focused and deterministic. So you could alter this and play around with it, whatever to your liking. So that is where you can find the temperature inside the API reference and the completions and create completions. Okay, so after we have defined the completions variable, we can go down below and we are going to have a response. And the response is going to be the completion, whatever it gives us back. And then now you can see that we have to go inside an object multiple times. So we can go back to our reference, API reference. We will go back to create chat completions, and you can see this is the response. So we're going to have the completion dot data dot choices, because you see it goes inside the choices, and it's going to be the first on the choices object, and then it's going to go inside the message, and then if you just want to have the content, you could put dot content. So I'm going to show you exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to have response equals completion dot data dot choices, and then it'll be 0, I don't know why, dot message dot content. So that is what we're going to get back. This is going to be the answer right here that we're going to get back, and we are going to put it inside of the response variable. So after that, we need to send the response over to our front end. We could console log the response. We could do that, comma, and then we need to return the next response.json, and we're just going to return the response. Okay, so now let's finish our front end code to make sure we receive it, and then let's test everything out. So let's go back to our page.js, and it looks like actually everything is ready, completed to go. So let's test everything out to make sure we are getting everything correctly. Okay, so let's test everything out to make sure everything's working. So right here I have an input is who was the first president of the United States. I'm going to open up the React DevTools, go to the network tab, and we are going to click send, and we should get a 200 status back, and we should be able to get the answer back from the AI. So let's click send. We get a 200 status. The response was George Washington was the first president of the United States, and the payload we sent back was the message. So everything is working as it should. So let me just minimize this real quick, and let me just show you guys exactly something else. So we could go to the console log, right? And as you can see here, we get all the console logs from our route file. So we console log the response, and as you can see, it says response, and the response gives us this. Cool. So everything seems to be working fine. Now that we know the response is working from the AI, we actually want to show the response to our user. So to do that, we are going to make this very, very simple. Like I said, beginner's course. Let's scroll this terminal down, and right below the form, we can actually put that message. So we're storing all of the messages from ChatGPT inside of messages. So right below the form, let's just put a p tag. We could say messages, and then let's style it when it comes back real quick. So we're going to say class name text center, and then text could be like 4XL. Okay, cool. So let's try it again. So let's go back. We know everything's working. So we can say what is 2 plus 2. We're going to hit send. And then right here, as an AI language model, I can tell you that the answer to 2 plus 2 is 4. So obviously you could give it different instructions, the AI model, to make it the answer different by changing the temperature, by changing the prompt. You could change a bunch of stuff, but since this is beginner, this is a working AI ChatGPT model that you can actually implement. So now let's just go to one example that is a real world example, and this is going to be able to change English to Spanish, English to French, or vice versa. To change English to Spanish is very simple to do. So we are going to go inside of our backend code, our server code, and where we are sending the content, which is the body.message, right below before that, we are going to have backticks. So we can have backticks inside all of this. Oh. And then inside of the body message, we want to make this curly braces with the $sign before this. And then we could type in whatever we want as a string here. So we're going to tell the model to translate this into Spanish and then semicolon. So it's going to translate whatever the message that we type in on the input into Spanish. So now everything should be translated in Spanish. So let's try that out real quick. Refresh the page. It should, instead of asking me anything, it's going to say translate. So we could say, hi, how are you doing? We'll click send. And then it says, hola, ¿cómo estás? So it looks like everything is working. That's how you can create real world applications. Obviously, there is no limit. Whatever you could think of to make, you can make. So the more creative you get, the better your AI bot will be. But this is 2 quick examples that you can use to get up and going and get your feet wet. So if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and also subscribe for more content like this. On my channel, I go over everything full stack, usually the MERN stack, NextJS 13, HTTP request, TailwindCSS, front end development. So if you like that stuff, do hit that subscribe button, and happy coding.